You remember the Reagan campaign when they had It's Mourning in America? Well, the folks at Citizens for the Republic, a 501c4 conservative grassroots lobbying organization, reborn under the leadership of Reagan stalwarts, have featured this new ad. And we can't, of course, show you the visual, but we can play Mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, in America.
There's mourning in America. Today, 15 million men and women won't have the opportunity to go to work. Businesses shuttered. 2,900 families will have their homes foreclosed by nightfall. This afternoon, 6,000 men and women will be married, each of their children to be born with a $30,000 share of the runaway national debt. Our government is now taking over the choices we once made in life. There's mourning in America. Under the leadership of President Obama, our country is fading and weaker and worse off. His policies were a grand experiment, policies that failed. This November, let's choose a smaller, more caring government, one that remembers us.
There you have it. Mourning in America, very powerful stuff. Citizens for the Republic Executive Vice President Bill Pasco just happens to be on the line with us to chat about this and other things, politics. Bill, how are you?
I am well, Phil. How are you doing this afternoon?
Doing very well. Great ad, by the way.
Thank you. We appreciate that. But, you know, let's face it. The reason the ad works, the reason it's so wonderful, is because it's a mirror image of the original ad from 26 years ago. The Reagan campaign created an ad that everybody remembers. It's one of the greatest political ads of all time because it perfectly matched the mood of the electorate to the moment and the man in office. And that's what we were trying to do with this new ad. All we did was we took the original ad. If you play the two ads back to back, it's even more chilling because we're using the same data points. In the original ad, they talked about 6,500 couples getting married today, and their children will look forward to a bright future. And they talked about how many couples are buying a house today. So we used those same data points, except in today's economy, under the leadership of President Obama, things aren't nearly as bright, things aren't nearly as optimistic, and that's why we decided it is mourning in America, except it's mourning with a U.
Right. And I tell you, Bill, the folks out there on the left have tried to paint this as a Republican problem that's been years in the making. And I illustrated for the listeners a couple of weeks ago, went back and looked at the federal budgets for, I guess from 1980 on to see where they were. And what you find is an incredible economy and an incredible resurgence from the 1980s with Ronald Reagan and the benefits of that we were still feeling into the 90s.
That's right.
And what happened was we had, of course, there was deficit spending. Then we got Newton Du Bois in, and they reined in spending, not as much as we would hope, and certainly the Republicans haven't done as much as they could, but they've done such a much better job than the Democrats have done. And we had balanced budgets in the late 1990s after the Republican-controlled Congress. Of course, now Clinton is trying to take credit for all that when he went along kicking and screaming for a lot of this. But what happened was we had an amazing thing happen. We had a budget surplus in 2001, in the fiscal year of 2001. Then, of course, the 9/11 attacks hit. And after the 9/11 attacks hit, of course, the economy went down. And for the first time, year-over-year revenues were down for the first time in 30 years.
That's right.
Then we got the Bush tax cuts in. And, of course, the deficit exploded at that point. As I say, we went into 2001 with a surplus, and then the deficit exploded to about $453 billion in 2004, but then it began to come down. And what people need to understand is this, is right before Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats took control of Congress, we had gotten the deficit down to $160 billion. And within 2 years, it went from a $160 billion deficit to a $1.4 trillion deficit under the Democrats. How they can blame this on the Republicans is beyond me.
Well, Phil, I'm glad you're pointing out the key to remember, Democrats are talking as if they've only been in charge for the last year and a half. But you've pointed out quite correctly that, in fact, Democrats took control of the Congress after the 2006 election.
Right.
They've been in charge for 3.5 years now. Every tax bill originates in the House and then goes to the Senate. Every spending bill moves from the Congress to the President. The President cannot spend money that the Congress doesn't appropriate. So when we're talking about these massive deficits, and you're talking about moving from $160 billion a year, which, let's face it, I wouldn't like to spend $160 billion a year more than we have, but in a multi-trillion-dollar economy, that's a relatively small percentage. But now all of a sudden we're talking about increasing that by an order of magnitude. We're increasing that by 10 times, a $1.4 trillion deficit in 1 year. Now keep in mind, that's just the first couple years that you're talking about. Under President Obama's outlays that he's projected over the next 10 years, we're going to double the national debt in 5 years and triple it in 10 years. That's remarkable. And everywhere we go, we see that there are people who are disillusioned and depressed who don't understand Washington. They think, most importantly, they think that Washington doesn't understand them. And again, that's who we were trying to reach out to with this ad.
And how many states is this ad running?
Well, we began airing it a few weeks ago nationally on cable and broadcast, and then we pulled it down. And frankly, we're a small grassroots organization. Ronald Reagan originally founded Citizens for the Republic in 1977. It was his political action committee between the two campaigns of 1976 and 1980. And then, as you might expect, it lay dormant for a number of years. And recently, some of the old Reagan stalwarts like Ed Meese and Peter Hannaford and Mari Massing and Dan Oliver and myself and Craig Shirley, a couple others, we decided that we needed a new organization to act as a bridge between the conservative grassroots activity we see out there, particularly led by the Tea Party movement, on the one hand, and the regular Republican and conservative establishment in Washington. Because frankly, I can tell you, even the conservative and the Republican establishment in Washington gets too much inside the Beltway sometimes, and they're not even aware of the extent of the disillusionment outside the Beltway.
Yeah,
so we thought it.
A lot of these folks inside the Beltway, well, Reagan Republicanism is over, and the people want a bigger government. They just want to manage it better.
That's right. We talk about big government conservatism sometimes, and that's not the way Ronald Reagan was. Ronald Reagan was a guy who believed that government is best, which governs least, which governs closest to home. He did everything he could to shrink the size of government. And the first and most important thing he did was to starve the beast with the tax cuts. Now, that's where President Bush was good, and that's where the Republicans now in Congress are good, because they're talking about extending the current tax rates. And if I could take just a second, Phil, I've got a pet peeve. And the pet peeve is the media, the liberal establishment media, that continues to talk about these as the Bush tax cuts. You know what? They were tax cuts in 2001 and 2003 when they were passed. But since then, they're not tax cuts. They're the current tax rates.
Right.
We're not talking about cutting anybody's taxes. We're talking about preventing a massive tax increase that is on the books, scheduled to go into effect on New Year's Day, unless the Congress and the President act before then. So we're not talking about cutting taxes for anybody. The Democrats who are talking about, President Obama's going to give you a tax cut. No, he's not. He's just going to keep your taxes from going up. He's not going to give you a tax cut. And the terrible thing about it is he wants to keep the current tax rates only for the middle class. He doesn't want the job creators in our society to get the tax cuts. That's the toughest thing that we've got in this economy, is people who have the money to invest, the job creators, the entrepreneurs, the guys who have an idea and a little bit of capital, the ones who in every other recovery have been the ones creating the new jobs that get us out of the doldrums, out of the depression, and into recovery. They're sitting on their money right now because they don't know what the tax rates are going to be next year.
That's right.
And you can't blame them.
There's so much uncertainty out there. And you make a great point, Bill. Because if they were talking about raising the top rate over $200,000 to 90%, they wouldn't be saying we got to preserve the Kennedy tax cuts, because that's what he did. He dropped the top rate from about 90% down to 70%. Reagan dropped it from 70 on down to 27, and so when you start going backwards, we got to preserve these. Well, you're exactly right. Anything other than keeping what we've got is a tax increase. And so this is not going to be preserving the Bush tax cuts. This is going to be the Obama and Pelosi tax increase.
That's exactly right. And that's what we're trying so hard to block. It's unconscionable, frankly. Keep in mind, this year, for the first time since the passage of the Budget Act in 1974, so we're talking 36 years now, for the first time in 36 years, the Congress didn't pass a budget for the federal government. Right. They're spending money now without having a budget that's been passed by the Congress. And now they've gone home to the voters without 1st having a vote on whether or not we're going to extend the current tax rates.
Right.
So that's another 2 months' worth of indecision. That's another 2 months' worth of our job creators sitting on their money and, frankly, looking elsewhere. I mean, the Democrats around the country are screaming bloody murder. The one issue that they're all using in all their campaigns is this bit about outsourcing, right? American corporations are always outsourcing jobs. Well, frankly, when you create a tax structure where it becomes better for investment, where you get a higher return on your investment dollar for dollar to put your money overseas where the tax rate is lower, what do you expect them to do?
Well, I'm sure you've seen the Steve Wynn YouTube video out there where he's talking about how he's having to split his operation between here and China because China's government is more stable.
That's exactly right. Not only more stable, but more attractive to business investment. What does it say? What does it say when the Chinese government is more attractive and stable for business investment?
It's ridiculous. I got to ask you, just from an inside radio standpoint, the guy that you had do the voiceover for this, was this the same guy that did the original "Mourning in America for Reagan" spot?
It really sounds like it, doesn't it?
No,
it's not. The guy who did the original spot is a broadcasting legend by the name of Hal Riney. The voice talent in this ad is a guy by the name of Hal Burrows. They do share the same first name, but not the same last name.
Right. So is the first guy, is he still around?
I honestly don't know. I don't want to say.
Yeah, but this guy sounds a lot like him. I mean, it's a really good send-up of it. So this ad running around trying to get people to understand what's going on as far as this economy. The Democrats are out there running around trying to tell folks that this economy is because of Bush. But we look back into the end of the Bush administration, and there is some blame to be spread to George W. Bush. As I like to say, he saddled up the socialist horse that Obama's riding to the finish line right now. I mean, we got TARP, we got the auto bailout, and all of this. What do you think happened to Bush in those last 6 months? Was it bad advice? Because to me, if you stick by your conservative principles, you can't go wrong. It seems like he just threw those to the side and said, well, this is an extraordinary circumstance. We've got to go socialism on him.
Well, I think what happened was a combination of things. I think the Bush administration in the last 6 to 9 months really, when you get to the end of a two-term presidency, you're really you're packing your bags already. You're thinking about your next job. Everybody in the administration is looking for, where am I going to go after this? And when this thing hit, I think two things happened. One, Bush froze. If you'll recall, even at that late date, at the end of September of 2008, his own approval numbers were so low that he thought, you know what, I'm not the guy to make this decision. I'm going to hand this off to my Treasury Secretary who comes from Wall Street, and he knows what to do. And up until that point, every indication had been that the Treasury Secretary, Hank Paulson, had been a free market guy,
right.
a guy who understood markets. But faced with that calamity, I think he wasn't a philosophical conservative. I think he didn't really understand the roots of capitalism, and he froze, and he paid attention to the big money guys on Wall Street who all said, write us a big check, please. Yeah. We have to have a big check, or we're going down. And if we go down, everybody goes down.
Right,
and they all just freaked out.
Yeah, they did. Well, we're about out of time here for this segment there, Bill. What is the web address where people can visit the Citizens for the Republic?
Citizens for the Republic is at cftr.org. You can see the ad there. You can make a contribution. I'm going to make a pitch because we've just put the ad on the air in Nevada in that Senate race. We think it's going to be very helpful there. And there's a series of other key Senate races that you were just talking about, Phil, where there are good Reagan Republicans running for office in very close races, and we think this ad will help.
All right, cftr.org.
That's it, cftr.org.
Bill Pasco, the Executive Vice President of that organization. Appreciate it very much, Bill. Good to talk with you.
Thank you, Phil. Have a good afternoon.
You too.